I am Michael Henley, the CEO and founder of Brandywine Private Wealth. I'm joined by Matt D'Amelio, a rockstar estate attorney. So let's jump in, Matt. When a family executes an estate plan with your office, why is the collaboration with kind of the wealth advisory team so vital?
Well, it's so great to have the wealth advisory team there because they have so much background information about the client that often the client may not give us because the client didn't realize it was relevant, or maybe it's a new client. We just haven't established a deep enough relationship yet to get down to it. But the wealth advisor usually has all that information handy.
And what your office does a great job at is basically letting us know, hey, retitle the account beneficiaries on the IRAs and Roth IRAs to the revocable trust or what have you. Without that kind of second step, the entire estate plan almost gets kind of null and void, right?
The estate plan is absolutely worthless if you don't coordinate the assets, and very difficult for clients to do that on their own. If the wealth planning team is a part of the process, understands what the plan is that we're putting together, and participated in the creation of that plan that we're putting together, the wealth advisory team can help make sure that assets are properly titled, beneficiaries are properly designated,
Yep.
and coordinate all of those assets with the estate plan.
A question we often get, Matt, if a family wants to make sure their life savings remain in the family bloodline, I want to make absolutely certain if something happens to one of my kids, it stays in my family. How does that actually get accomplished with estate documents?
So leaving assets within the family is probably the single most common reason why people are creating trusts today. So as federal estate tax exemption has increased and there's less people perhaps that are subject to federal estate tax, they're still concerned about where their wealth will go over time. With a federal estate tax combined for spouses today of over $27 million, there's a lot of wealthy folks, right, who are not subject to estate tax, but they're nevertheless using trust to make sure that assets stay within their bloodline. That just means that at their death, their usually revocable trust agreement will create a trust for their children. It will limit the access to it. And there are ways to provide the children with protection, but still allow them to enjoy the wealth that you have created for their lifetime.
So as an example, if I pass away and leave one of my kids, $5 million, for example, and then my child passes away, can I make sure that that $5 million goes down to my grandkids or his or her kids as opposed to the spouse?
That's correct. So if you leave the child $5 million outright, that means when the child passes, the $5 million will pass under the child's will, which could go anywhere or perhaps not have a will.
Okay.
If instead you left the $5 million to trust, you get to grant, if you want, that child with what's called a power of appointment, which is essentially the ability to designate a beneficiary of the trust. And you, as the creator of the trust, get to define the universe of people that the child can appoint to. So you would typically limit that to your bloodline, your descendants.
Clients are often concerned with a divorcing spouse. So let's just say if I leave that same example, $5 million to my son or daughter, some years later they get divorced. How do I make sure that divorcing spouse is not taking, half of my life savings?
The best way to try to protect or hedge against that risk is to leave the assets in trust for the child. So long as that trust is properly drafted, there's a really good chance that the divorcing spouse will never be able to access those assets.
If a properly executed trust is established, does this mean that all assets will be protected, like retirement accounts, life insurance? How's that sort of thing work?
You have to look at assets individually because different assets have different tax characteristics. And so some assets are better suited to be left in trust than others. And you also have to understand what the client's overall goal is. But all assets could be left to a trust for the benefit of the child, and that trust will provide that level of divorce protection.
Okay. So basically, if assets are received by a child and co-mingled with the spouse, is that pretty much a guarantee to have them subject to divorce?
Yeah, if you leave the child money and the child does not keep those assets segregated and instead uses them to buy assets that they enjoy jointly, like, for example, a home or vehicles, it's like trying to take the cream out of the coffee. Once you do that, those assets become marital assets subject to division in a divorce action.
Thanks everyone for joining. Like always, if you have further questions on your family's estate plan, feel free to reach out, scan the QR code to see how we might be able to help.